Let's take a look at the forces that cause evolution. So there's 5 forces that cause evolution. There's natural selection, which we've already talked about. We have mutations, genetic drift, gene flow, and non-random mating. We aren't going to talk about non-random mating, so you don't need to know that one. The ones that cause the most evolutionary change are natural selection, and then also genetic drift and gene flow. So those are going to be causing the most change. So let's take a look at mutations first. So remember that a mutation is just a change in the DNA sequence. Mutations don't happen very often, but when they do, they're just random. They're just by chance. So they're not directed. They're not going to happen because it's going to make the organism survive better in the environment. Mutations just happen randomly, and remember that some mutations could be harmful, some could be beneficial, and some are neutral. So it's just totally random what you're going to get. But mutations are important because they're a source of new alleles, and they're the ultimate source of genetic variability. And then when we do get a mutation, then natural selection will have something to select for among the population, because now there's some genetic variation. And if it's something that is beneficial in the environment, nature will select for that mutation, and those individuals with the mutation will survive better and live, and then be able to reproduce and then pass that mutation on to their offspring. And then eventually the population will evolve and more individuals will end up with that mutation. So let's just take a look at an example of a mutation. So let's say that we've got a population that we've got all type A and type O blood individuals in the population. But maybe there's a mutation in our blood type gene where now we've got a type B allele that has arisen. So now our offspring, we can have some different blood types. So not only do we have type A and type O blood types in our offspring, but we could also get type AB and type B offspring as well. And this will definitely change the genetic variation in the population. So here's just a picture showing this. So here's our original population, and we've got maybe some green, purple, and blue alleles in our population. But then there's a mutation, and now we've got a yellow allele. And you can see that over time, this yellow allele gets passed on to some of the offspring, and now we've got more genetic variation in the population. So you can see how mutations can cause the population to evolve. Okay, another thing that can cause evolution to occur and can cause the population to evolve or change is something called genetic drift. And genetic drift is going to be important when we've got small populations. So that's important to remember, that genetic drifts is going to occur in a small population. And again, this is just going to be a random change and just due to chance. So this is not adaptive. It's not going to be making the population better adapted to the environment like natural selection does. And it actually decreases the genetic variation in a population. So we've got 2 examples we'll talk about, the founder effect and the bottleneck effect. Okay, so let's just take a look at an example of genetic drift. So let's say we've got a little meadow and we've got some wildflowers growing in it. And let's say that a hiker comes by and walks through and stomps on these flowers here. And those flowers don't survive, they don't reproduce. But the flowers that are in the white box, those will reproduce. So the next summer we come back to the meadow, and here's our population of flowers. And we can see that the colors have changed a bit from our first generation the previous summer. And let's say some more hikers come by and they stomp on the flowers again. And let's say only these two flowers in the white boxes, they survive. And they're able to reproduce. And we come back the third summer to our meadow, and these are the only flowers that are growing. And notice how our population has really changed or evolved. So now all we have in our population are these red flowers. And that's just by random chance. It's not because they were better adapted to the environment. It's just they happened to be in the right spot where they didn't get stomped on by the hikers. Okay, so one thing we can see with genetic drift that causes this is what's called a founder effect. So this is when we have a few individuals that leave a larger population and they found a new population. And so when they leave the larger population, these few individuals are not going to have all of the alleles of the larger population. And so we're going to have less genetic variation in this new founder population with this smaller number of individuals that are starting the new population. So just a couple examples of a founder effect. We have polydactylism in the Amish population. And then another one kind of closer to home here in Utah would be fumarase deficiency in the FLDS population. So fumarase deficiency, this affects the mitochondria. They're not able to produce as much ATP. And what happens is this will affect the brain function. And so you get individuals with intellectual disability. They will have physical disabilities as well. Some of them can't even walk. And then they also have seizures as well. So let's just look at the founder effect here in the Amish. So here we've got our larger population. And in the mid-1700s, we had a small group of people from Germany that were Amish that emigrated to the US, and the small number of people obviously did not have all of the alleles of the original population. So they settled over here in the US and obviously had kids, passed on their alleles, but they didn't have all the alleles of the original population. And so they look quite different from the original population, and they have less genetic variation. And also among the one of the original couples that came, they actually were carrying alleles for polydactylism, where they end up with extra fingers and extra toes. So that actually has been passed on in the Amish population in the US. And that is actually occurring at a much higher rate than we would see in the general population. Okay, another example of genetic drift would be the bottleneck effect. So this would be when we have a larger population that all of a sudden decreases in size because maybe there's a natural disaster or maybe because of human actions. And this is just by chance which individuals survive, and we end up losing a lot of genetic variation because we really decrease the size of the population and maybe only a few individuals are left alive. And so a good example of a bottleneck effect would be in cheetahs. So here we have our larger population. We have lots of different alleles. But then there was a bottleneck effect in cheetahs where a lot of them died off because of environmental changes, and just a few of them survived, and so they didn't have all the alleles of the original population. And so these few individuals survived, they had offspring, And the population of cheetahs that are alive today don't have as much genetic variation as the original population did before the bottleneck effect. And so the cheetahs that we have today are all very genetically similar to each other. They're so similar that you can actually take a piece of skin from one cheetah and then graft it onto another cheetah, and they actually won't reject it, which is pretty crazy to think about. You can't do that with humans. So that's how similar they are to each other. So very little genetic variation. Okay, and then our last thing we're going to talk about that causes evolution would be gene flow. And this is when we have individuals that are going to be moving between populations and obviously taking their alleles with them. And then that will change the allele frequencies between the populations. So let's just take a look at a picture and show you gene flow. So here we've got two different populations of beetles. So they're the same species, but we've got some genetic variation in this species. So we've got some brown beetles and green beetles. And so if we have a brown beetle migrate into the green population, that will change the genetic variation of this green beetle population, because now you've got a brown beetle in there. And then if it's breeding with the green beetles and having offspring, that'll change our allele frequencies there. And then if we have a green beetle migrating over to the brown beetle population, and if they keep going back and forth, pretty soon the two populations will be pretty similar to each other. So that can also happen in gene flow.